Hey people, not Seth here. Actually, it's Malcolm Rose, and I'm here to talk about week number 3 of the Crawl Cosplay tournament. This time we have a brand new unique that this is modeled after. In Trunk, it's called Nobody, Grudge of the Unmourned. He seems like kind of an interesting unique to fight. I haven't played Trunk lately, so I don't really know for sure. I don't have any personal experience with it, but if you want to read about the unique as an NPC, as an enemy, there's some information about it here. It's kind of interesting. Should be kind of a drag-out fight. Doesn't really matter for the sake of this challenge. It's just kind of what the cosplay is modeled after, so to speak. The important stuff for you as a player, if you're playing this tournament, is that you have to play as a Revenant, which is a new species in Trunk. It has replaced Ghoul. As I said a couple weeks ago when the tournament challenge was for a Poltergeist, in Trunk pretty much all of the undead species have been removed, and a couple of new ones have taken their places. Revenant, being modeled after Ghoul, has Claws 1, and kind of a laundry list of what I would say are maybe slightly over-engineered things that are actually pretty interesting at the same time. So I think probably before we even get into the details of this week's challenge, probably I should talk about the species. Because it's new, because people may not have played it before, the thing about it is that, well, because it has sort of unique things going on, it's going to impact your playstyle quite a lot and your plan for the character. So, if I were to go into LearnDB and just kind of look up Revenant, it says, new species in 0.33, replacing ghouls, an extra magic skeleton, resistances, resist cold, infinity negative resistance, so we're immune to torment as well, resist holy minus, that is to say we have a holy vuln, so watch out for holy branded weapons. They do way more damage than you would expect. LRD vulnerable, which probably is not so bad, but you may need to watch out for the deep troll earth elementalists. And like I said, it has claws 1. Now that's all pretty straightforward, but here's where it gets kind of interesting. They have this thing called Spell Claw, where anytime they cast a directly damaging spell, so pretty much just conjurations, some exceptions, if you cast a directly damaging spell, you will also automatically attack whatever the highest HP enemy is within range. As you can imagine, this is ludicrously powerful. It's turn economy, you're casting and you're doing an attack at the same time. What's not to like? Also at level 3, we get a random level 1 damaging spell, such as Shock, for example. And you build up charges to super boost spells once you hit level 3. So that ability is actually called Mnemnophage, Mnemnophage. Try pronouncing that. And the way that works is it's kind of reminiscent of that newish spell, I believe it's called Graveclaw, the one where you can have up to 3 charges and it does a good amount of damage, and it's smite targeted. Very powerful spell, but you have to charge up by defeating enemies. This kind of works the same way. Mnemnophage, a Revenant property. Hostile monsters dying in sight builds up memory charges capped by XL. The more levels you have, the more charges you can build up. The Enkindle ability then uses up all charges to make that many directly damaging spells cost 0 MP. So now you've got mana economy on top of your turn economy. Be easier to cast, so you get a wizardry effect while this is active. Ignoring encumbrance, pretty good if you're wearing a shield or heavy-ish armor. And get extra power, so I assume that's an Archmage effect. Spellclaw activations during the Enkindle will actually heal you for a portion of the damage dealt. I think this is a cool species. I think it's a little bit over-engineered, like I said. I think that if you just removed the Mnemnophage ability entirely and Enkindle, you would have a pretty good basis for a traditional sort of crawl species. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. In fact, I would say a lot of the things coming out of this dev, I want to say Draco Omega is to blame for this one. A lot of the things coming from that dev are probably more interesting than what we've seen to be allowed in Crawl for years and years. So I don't want to poop on it because the reality is it actually is. These are largely interesting concepts, and I will dog on it just a little bit because I do think that active ability is just a little too much. Like it's just a little wild for mainline, but it looks more like something that would belong in a fork that's a little more radical, like Kimchi. But it's not bad. It's interesting. I like the spell claw thing. I think it sounds almost ludicrously overpowered at first blush, but there are certain ways that it's balanced. Revenants, for instance, have terrible statistics. As seen in this challenge, if you start as a Cinder Acolyte, for example, you start with 4 dexterity, which, if you want your dodge training to do much of anything for you, and you probably do, you really probably want to take that to about 10. But, choices are to be made because that means you're not increasing strength, so you're not getting extra damage on strength-based weapons, and you're not increasing intelligence, which you probably want to do considering this species strongly encourages you to use damaging spells. Which in and of itself is kind of interesting because people seem to like the idea of playing blaster casters, but they're really not that great in Crawl. Honestly, this whole species almost looks like something you would see in B-Crawl, because I know BH Auth loves hybrid type characters that do melee and magic at the same time, and this species strongly encourages the player to kind of pursue one of those strategies. And this challenge itself, with some of the special conducts, does that as well, and we will get into that shortly. I think I've covered just about everything to do with the Revenant. Cinder Acolyte, fairly old at this point, just the zealot background for Ignis. You start worshipping Ignis. You can't gain piety with Ignis because Ignis is a dying god. You have a few different abilities that largely help you in the early game, although there is one capstone. I call it a capstone, but basically you just always have one use of it and then it's done forever. Which sends you rocketing up to the floor above you. Used to be the most powerful escape ability in the game because it was pretty much instant. Now it takes, I want to say, 3 to 4 turns, so it's really not that much better than a teleport. However, for this particular Crawl Cosplay challenge, it's going to play a very interesting and special role in maybe some of our strategies. At least the ones I would recommend. Take a little sip of my coffee here and take a little coffee break. It's good. Okay, what's next? Okay, I'm going to start from the top, even though this cosplay conduct is a little bit complicated. So these are the ones that are worth 5 points each, as I talked about in the last 2 weeks. 50 points maximum, 5, 5, 5, and then 5 for each of these milestones. As I said before, these milestones are the same for every species, or excuse me, every challenge, every week, so we'll simply ignore those. We'll go from the top and we'll talk about cosplay conduct points and the bonus challenges, which don't give us points, and in fact, just give us the stars that are used to to act as tiebreakers. So, cosplay conduct points. If we're playing our Revenant Cinder Acolyte of Ignis, by the way, you have to stick with Ignis, you can't simply abandon him. If we're doing that for this challenge, for this Crawl Cosplay Tournament, Week 3, what we have to do if we want these 5 points from the Skills Cosplay Conduct is we have to keep our highest weapon skill equal to our highest spell skill, past skill level 10. For example, if you are leveling Unarmed Combat to level 11, you must also level a spell skill to level 11, and vice versa. This does not need to be perfect, but need to be the same in the Morg's skilling table. See this link for a visual explanation by Plankenstein. I think this is pretty straightforward. However, I have gone ahead and grabbed this image. I would just click this, but, I gotta say, Raga, in the future, probably don't use Discord as a as a file server or an image host rather. If someone's not logged in, they're going to not be able to get to that if they don't have a Discord account. That's also part of why I'm recording this video for the second time, because I was in a incognito window and I didn't feel like putting two videos together. So that's okay though. I needed to record this again anyway for reasons I'll get into here in a second. So I did download it though. Here's the image. If this helps, good. Basically, the thing in the red and the thing in the blue, one of each needs to be, you know, kept roughly equivalent if you get above level 10. So we see in this particular case, we have unarmed combat at 15, therefore we had to keep fire magic in step as well, or, you know, something in this window. They happen to choose fire magic. He got to 15 there as well. If I was playing this and I wanted to make life real easy for myself, probably I would pick two things with the exact same aptitude, so that, like, I'm, say, using axes, and then perhaps translocations. Well, I wouldn't pick translocations. I would probably pick something more useful, like, well, for this kind of character, let's say conjurations. Probably we're going to be using conjurations no matter what we do anyway. So, you know, it's if we can keep those equal, you can train them the exact same because they have the same aptitude. It does say, quote, "This does not need to be perfect," unquote, because, for example, if you have chosen unarmed combat as your weapon, so to speak, and then you're maybe focusing on conjurations or air magic, there's a disparity there. You get a +1 aptitude here and like a -2 aptitude on air, or a -1 aptitude on alchemy, etc. So you might need to play around with it and babysit it a little bit. Maybe like turn, you know, where you can hit the button a few times and it will make your skill bold, and it's training that skill more than the other one, and then have the one with, let's say in this case it would be the unarmed combat would be getting trained less, and then like your summonings, if that was what you were going for, would be getting trained more. Which, of course, for this challenge, probably we wouldn't be doing summonings for reasons I'll get into in a second, and also just because Revenants gain all those bonuses from using directly damaging spells. But, you know, that's kind of up to you if you want to babysit it or not. The whole "does not need to be perfect" thing is a little bit vague, but I would assume they're going to be cool with it as long as it doesn't come out of lockstep past, like, one integer. I assume what they expect you to do is, you know, it says keep your highest weapon skill equal to your highest spell skill. So I don't think this is something you're allowed to fix at the last minute. I think the idea is that you are supposed to keep them basically the same once you get them above 10. And I like that addendum because, you know, then you can kind of do what you want in the early game, but once you get to a certain level of mastery, then you've got to start playing by the conduct. So it's pretty cool. Just, if they're not the same aptitude, just babysit it a little bit, keep an eye on it. Use skill training targets and you'll never get more than one integer away anyway, so it's probably fine. And I wouldn't, if it was me playing, like I said, if I wanted to make it easy on myself, I would just pick two things that had the same aptitude. However, the game may not go that way. You may find a great spell in a school that doesn't quite work out for you the way that you would like. So as far as playing optimally goes, you may have to babysit your skills just a little bit to stay compliant with that conduct if you want that 5 points. This is actually a good point to talk about the aptitudes of Revenants. To some people, these may look bad. I actually think they're pretty okay. -1 is not as bad as you think. If I was going to play this character, probably I would go with axes. I know it seems pretty attractive to go for the +1 aptitude, and oh boy, we get Claws 1. Claws 1's kind of crappy, actually. It's only a +2 to unarmed combat damage. It's not that great. It's probably, if I had to guess, it's probably your best weapon in the early game. On Ignis, you get a -1 weapon of flaming, which is curious, but not great. With that said, we get as many challenges as we want, so I'm not super worried about the early game. As many attempts as we want, rather. And the truth is, axes are just awesome in DCSS. They're the best weapon. Cleave is good. Cleave is extra good when you're doing it automatically when you cast spells via Spellclaw. And if you have Enkindle active and you're healing from those attacks, oh boy is it better to be healing multiple times and not just once. So go with axes. Strongly recommend for this species, for this challenge, whatever. Axes is going to be what you want to do. And of course, you know, if you find some radical, awesome artifact on D1 or something, yeah, go with that. You find Wormbane, probably you're going to be using Wormbane. But in the general case, axes are going to be your go-to for any time you're playing this species and in this particular challenge as well. Uh, and then as far as spell schools go, I think for me, I would probably go with conjurations. I want to say it was Plankenstein who said that fire magic would be cool, but then he ran into some trouble later. And I'll talk about that. It kind of depends on what your plans are for the character, how many runes you're going to get. But there's certain rules with this particular cosplay challenge that maybe make fire not the best choice. So if I was doing this, I would kind of aim toward axes, conjurations, and then just kind of see where the game took me, because probably I'm going to find some stuff that's multi-school, and it's going to be using conjurations as one of those schools, particularly if I'm going for direct damaging. Now, sure, we do start with Scorch at level 2 as a Cinder Acolyte, but our aptitude kind of sucks for fire, and there's really good reasons why you probably don't want to put experience into that for this challenge, which I'll get into right now, actually, or at least in the next minute or so. So we'll go back to this window. So that was our skills cosplay conduct. And then number 2, branches. Make it to Crypt 3 before entering the Orcish Mines. Pretty straightforward. Typically, I like to get as many loot piles as possible. This robs us of Orc and Elf loot, which is a lot, until we enter Crypt 3. So you got to go into vaults. You got to get down to vaults. I believe 3 is where Crypt usually is, or maybe always is, and then get down to the bottom of Crypt 3, and then you can go into Orc. Pretty straightforward, right? Pretty straightforward, right. Except when we get to the bonus challenges, we will see that there's something else going on here, which makes this a little bit more complicated. Number 3, ability, cast a level 8 or 9 spell with the Enkindle ability. I think there's something sort of messed up with the morgues where well, not messed up, it just doesn't necessarily display the data. They can't exactly verify that you did this, but the reality is you're going to have Enkindle basically whenever you want, as long as you've got charges. So how this challenge really ought to read is just like, cast a level 8 or 9 spell, get a level 8 or 9 spell online, and essentially you have fulfilled this. You'll probably end up using it with Enkindle anyway if you feel like winning the game, because guess what? It probably feels real good to be able to cast level 8 and 9 spells for 0 mana, if I had to guess. Plus, you can cast them a little bit sooner than you otherwise would be able to because of that free wizardry effect. So probably this is just going to happen as a matter of course if you play as a caster, which, by the way, tells us that we probably want to pump intelligence the whole game and just kind of live with our terrible decks. I worry a bit about stat 0. I might pump it a little bit, but I think I would probably, if I was running this character, due to this challenge, most of my stat ups would go into intelligence, and I would just live with the danger. Especially since we don't have to 1-1 this. If we lose due to having no evasion, it's not that big of a deal. Just play another run. Alright, bonus challenges. My precious. Little Lord of the Rings reference there. We have to get the silver rune as our first rune and the golden rune as our second. This is kind of interesting. Typically conducts like this back in the day were sort of like super challenges, but they were even harder because kind of the limitations of the morgue files made it so you had to make the challenge more like you can't even enter a branch that has any other rune until you get such and such rune. But please note, that's not the rule here. So this is really not that bad by itself. You could go through lair, you could go through all of the S branches, you could even go through slime if you felt like it, and probably you should because loot piles are good. You just can't pick up the runes. So don't auto-explore on the final floor if you're going to do that, and you maybe exclude off the rune if and when you find it, and don't touch it. Although, this is what I was talking about earlier, where you combine this with this branch rule. If you're trying to get both your stars and all your points, it becomes a very interesting challenge, because now you can't even go to Orc and Elf, so you're really kind of stripped out of a certain amount of experience, a certain amount of loot. But nothing stops us, like I said, from doing slime, so if we can get that done before we pop up into vaults, that'd be great because then we get the loot. But maybe you're going to be experience starved or loot starved. I mean, most of my games I find that I go into Elf reasonably early, and so getting robbed of that stuff, and especially the orc loot, might be a little bit painful. So it just kind of depends. Something I will say about this, and this is the other reason why I'm remaking this video, I didn't realize when I was first recording this last night, but actually the Ignis ability, the one that you get one use of, that launches you up one floor and takes about the same amount of time as a teleport, can actually launch you out of a branch entirely. So if you're on Vault 1, you can launch yourself back up into Dungeon. This is really meaningful because since the Silver Rune is our first rune, we are actually not allowed to leave the vaults until we pick up that rune once we go in. Because people may not realize this, but that old rune lock mechanic still halfway exists, except instead of being locked out of entering vaults, you're locked out of leaving vaults if you don't have a rune. So if you go into the vaults and you don't have a rune, your choices are either go to Vaults 5 and get that rune, or go all the way into Tomb and get the golden rune. Either way, that's kind of a hard prospect if your character's not ready, and you're just kind of screwed at that point. So what this Ignis thing opens up is a strategy where if you feel like you need the experience and the loot, what you could do as far as pathing goes for this run is you go ahead and do your lair, maybe go ahead and do your S branches, leaving one out if it's too hard. Like if you get Spider, it might be tough. It just depends on what your character's doing. But probably we do lair, probably we do both S branches, most likely. We don't touch Orc because we're not allowed, which means we don't touch Elf because that's below Orc. We probably don't go to Slime just yet. What I would do, probably 9 characters out of 10 for this run, is I would do my S branches, do lair, do my S branches, and then probably I would finish out Dungeon. Maybe I'd finish out Dungeon before the S branches, whatever. But then, instead of going to Slime, unless my character was just super duper ready for it, I would just go into Vaults, and I would do Vaults 1 through 4. And then, I'm undead, so I shouldn't have too much trouble in Crypt, watching out for the dispel undead enemies. Then, I would just go into Crypt, do Crypt 1 through 3. Oh look, we made it to Crypt 3. Then I would go back up to Vaults 1, and I'm not breaking any rules, I just use the Ignis ability, launch myself back into Dungeon, and now that I've been to Crypt 3, I'm allowed to go into the Orcish Mines. Then I can go into Elf. Then I can get the big loot, both in the shops and Orc and in the loot, just the treasure pile in Elf. So then I've prepared the character to do a whole lot more stuff. Now, we still can't go pick up other runes, and still at some point we've got to go back to Vaults and make that as our first rune, but we've gotten the experience from all these places, we've gotten the loot from all these places, so once that's done, we could go ahead and go into Slime, if we haven't done it yet, get our loot there, or we could just go straight back to Vaults, prepared now with better loot, pick up the silver rune, and go from there. The golden rune has to be our second rune, that's the other part of this. Really, it's a little bit painful because obviously Tomb is always a crapshoot. As an undead, we have less challenges there, but, it's a big problem because you have Ushabtis instead of Torment to deal with, so you got to deal with the spell Undead there, which does a lot of damage. And unless they've changed things, you've got to deal with Mummy Curses, which do stat damage to you, unless they've taken that out of Trunk. And stat damage is a real big deal when your dex is 4, so you may have to kind of dip in and dip out a few times, just to work off that stat drain. Unclear if that still exists though, so maybe do some testing. But the Ignis thing, I didn't realize that when I made this video last night, and it's such a cool, useful thing in this challenge. You would probably never see somebody do that in a regular game of Crawl, but in this particular case, it makes your pathing a lot easier. It kind of allows you to circumvent the challenge that would otherwise exist with those two special conducts. So, kind of interesting. Thought it was worth talking about. Bonus challenge number 2, The Great Escape. Get any rune during the orb run. And again, this is kind of a slightly watered down version of what I would call a super duper hardcore challenge from back in the day. Back in the day, it was known as Orb Run Tomb, where the idea was that you had to not ever enter Tomb until the orb run was started, and then go in and then get your rune. But with this is a whole lot easier. What we can do is we can just leave an S branch rune uncollected, but clear the S branch of all enemies, and so you don't have to deal with popcorn getting in your way and making you spend more time on the orb run. It's still a challenge. Like, you still are spending more time on the orb run. You're still going up and down awkwardly, like I'm going to dungeon, then I'm going back down to lair, then I'm going into my S branch, and then blah, 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 then coming back the other way. So don't get me wrong, it's still added difficulty, but it's not outrageous, and I actually think it's just perfectly, I think it's perfectly challenged, or perfectly balanced, rather, for the kind of challenge that this is, where it's hard, but it's not so hard that it's going to drive a million people away, because people do play this casually, and I think it's nice to put things within reach, so to speak. Because Orb Run Tomb, maybe 1% or less of Crawl players will even want to touch a challenge like that. But this is really not that bad. It's just a little more time on the Orb Run, and it kind of creates some more fun experiences. Maybe you have to deal with a few more Panlords. And of course, because it's under the bonus challenges, you can just ignore these, play for points, and have your fun, and you probably won't win the tiebreaker or whatever, but hey, it's okay. I think this is plenty fun, whether you're playing for the first, number one slot, or if you're just playing for fun. Creates a very sort of interesting crawl experience that's outside of what you would normally see. And it's particularly well set up for this new species, because it's already a hybrid, or what we used to call a Gish type species. And then you add on things like this number one conduct, and you really sort of reinforce the lesson, or reinforce the theming. I think this would be a fun one. Like I said, I would use axes. I'd probably primarily pump intelligence on account of the fact that we've got to get to high level. I would use that little trick that I described to do my pathing cleverly out of vaults. Anything else? I think that's about it. I really can't recommend axes enough, though. I'm just imagining how great it would be to do Spell Claw to get that extra attack while you're already casting a spell. Oh yeah, I was going to talk about fire magic. Plankenstein was having a grand old time with fire magic despite the -2 aptitude. I was under the impression it'd be pretty cool too. There's this new trunk spell that I think it's level 4. It's ripped off from Rift Wizard, where it's like a fireball centered directly on you that doesn't do damage to you. Seemed like it'd be pretty good with an axe, where, especially with Revenant, where it's you're using it and then you're getting an attack as well if you're surrounded. If a Guardian Serpent does the surround on you, for example, how rad would that be? However, because we've got to hit up Tomb at some point to get our second rune, there are Binus in there, those little holy fire bird guys that revive. Not only do they do holy damage, which you need to be scared of, they have a ton of fire resist. So you're going to have some plan for dealing with them that isn't just fire magic. And oftentimes people will just say, oh, well, I'm firestorming, level 9 magic, fine. Well, maybe, but it'll take some time, even with that, because that's only part physical. It's still part fire. So if I was doing this, probably you would see me focusing primarily on conjurations. I would probably try to do my usual thing where if the game is amenable, I would, if it gives me the right spells, I would get some things that let me move around, Blank and V's Electric Charge, and just various stuff like that. Passage of Galubria would be good. And I would just kind of chip away at Tomb with spells that are sort of boring, straightforward, but will always win a 1v1, like Orb of Destruction would be a good one. And it just kind of depends what the game gives you, though. I could see just about any school handling this challenge. But again, what does the game want to give you? Which is why it's always very hard to do a 1, 2, 3 ABC type instruction set for here's how you win a game of Crawl, because every game is different. And even in a challenge like this, where you've got particular rules and particular conducts, you are still going to be heavily influenced by what the game gives you in terms of items, in terms of spells, layouts of levels even, whatever. So I guess play it by ear. But I do think that the basic rubric for where we're going and probably what we want to use will hold true in 9 out of 10 games. Like, I think it'd be rare not to want to use an axe in this challenge. I think it would be rare not to want to go ahead and start out with conjurations around level 3 whenever you find your first thing, whenever it's gifted to you due to your species, whatever. And then just kind of, it gives you a jumping off point because you're going to find more conjuration spells, and whatever you find that's particularly useful, maybe that points you in the direction of if you want to also train a different one. So yeah, I think I've covered everything. Looks like we already have some people, a lot of people actually, 3, 4, 5 people with 2 stars. So it can be done. It can be done. It's really not that bad. I think this is actually more doable than last week. It's a weaker species, even despite the Spellclaw thing, just due to the stats being messed up. It's a weaker species than Mountain Dwarf is. Mountain Dwarf is just way more straightforward. It's got good stats. It's got excellent aptitudes. You could just be a melee king. However, that challenge had that kind of wacky, oh boy, you can only cast spells past a certain level aspect to it. And this doesn't have that. So I think this is actually more straightforward and probably an easier week than the last. So alrighty, I think that covers everything. If you're playing in the tournament and you've already had your game, feel free to reply in the comments and let me know how it goes. If you haven't played it yet or you want to give it a shot, same thing. Just hit me up in the comments, reply, and if you have any questions, you want advice, whatever, I'll be taking a look at the comments for the next week that this is active. We have until Friday, so until the next week happens, so we've got a good bit of time. And I'll try to get the next review or tutorial or whatever you want to call these things. I'll try to get the next one out as soon as the game drops, or as soon as the information drops for week 4, because I think there are some people who kind of wait for me to make these videos and then go from there. So probably better if I give them as much time as possible. Anyway, I think that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and have fun with the Crawl Cosplay tournament.